Some tables are set for guests who never arrive or who never leave. On the evening of November 14, 2022, Merseyside police received an anonymous call about suspicious activity at a residence on Penny Lane, Liverpool. The voice on the line was that of an elderly woman, trembling, saying only, "There's something wrong at number 47. The lights come on every night at 7 p.m. sharp. The table has been set for 3 weeks, but I've never seen anyone come in or go out." Calls like this are common in residential neighborhoods. Concerned neighbors, misunderstandings, sometimes just loneliness seeking attention. The operator classified it as low priority and dispatched a routine patrol unit. Officers Sarah Hendricks and Tom Calloway arrived at the scene at 9:37 p.m., expecting to find an empty house or a reclusive resident. What they found would change their lives permanently. Number 47 Penny Lane was a well-maintained 3-story Victorian house with a wrought iron fence and a small, impeccably manicured front garden. Nothing on the outside suggested any irregularity. The lights were on the ground floor, a warm, inviting glow emanating from the dining room windows. Officer Hendricks rang the doorbell. No answer. She rang again, this time keeping her finger on the button for a full 10 seconds. Absolute silence from inside the house. Calloway knocked hard on the door, identifying himself. "Merseyside Police, we're responding to a welfare call. Please open the door." Nothing. But both officers could sense something strange, a smell coming from inside the house. It wasn't unpleasant, but intense. Food being prepared, strong spices, something baking in the oven. The officers circled the house, checking the windows and back doors, all locked. The dining room curtains were partially open, and through them Hendricks could clearly see the interior. A long mahogany table, beautifully set for 12 people, fine china plates, crystal goblets, silver cutlery arranged with military precision. In the center of the table were covered silver platters, jugs of drinks, baskets of bread, and an elaborate floral arrangement that looked absolutely fresh. "Tom," Hendricks called to his partner, his voice tense, "look at this. It's like they're expecting guests." Calloway looked through the window and frowned. But where's the host? Where's anyone? After 20 minutes of trying to make contact without success, Hendricks called back to the central office requesting permission for forced entry. There was enough cause for concern. The food being prepared suggested someone had been home recently, but the complete lack of response could indicate a medical emergency. Permission was granted. Calloway used a portable battering ram on the front door. 3 blows, and the lock gave way with a wooden snap. The door opened onto an elegantly decorated hallway, and a wave of heat and the smell of food hit them. "Merseyside Police, we're entering the residence," Hendricks announced loudly. Her hand instinctively went to the radio on her shoulder. No response from inside, but from the kitchen, clearly audible, came the sound of something boiling on the stove. They entered cautiously, Hendricks in front, Calloway covering. The hallway led directly to the dining room on the left and the kitchen at the back. With each step, their feet sank into a luxurious Persian rug. The walls were decorated with framed photographs, family, presumably. A middle-aged couple, 3 children of various ages, grandparents. Photos of holidays, graduations, celebrations. A normal, happy family. But as Hendricks looked closer, something bothered her. All the photographs were old. The 90s, maybe the early 2000s, judging by the clothes and the quality of the images. No recent photos, no digital photos. It's as if family life had stopped decades ago and never restarted. The dining room was even more impressive when viewed from the inside. The mahogany table gleamed under the light of a crystal chandelier, each facet reflecting tiny rainbows on the Victorian wallpapered walls. The 12 places were arranged with obsessive symmetry, 6 on each side of the long table. Each setting was identical, a white porcelain plate with gilded rims, a linen napkin folded into a swan shape, 3 crystal glasses, water, red wine, white wine, and a small place card with a name handwritten in elegant calligraphy. Hendricks approached and read the names aloud. Margaret, Thomas, Elizabeth, James, Catherine, Robert, Helen, William, Dorothy, Charles, Anne, and she paused at the last card, her voice faltering slightly. And it's blank. The 12th place has no name. Calloway was examining the platters in the center of the table. Carefully, using a pen to lift the silver lid of one of them, he revealed a perfectly prepared roast lamb, still steaming. "Sarah," Calloway said, his voice strained, "this is hot. It was taken out of the oven less than 15 minutes ago." He checked another dish, roasted potatoes with rosemary, another, glazed vegetables. All the food was at serving temperature, as if the guests were about to arrive at any moment. The pitchers contained red wine in one, cranberry juice in another, and water with lemon slices in a third. The bread in the basket was still warm to the touch. Someone had prepared this elaborate dinner very recently. But where was that person? Officer Hendricks felt a chill run down her spine. There was something profoundly wrong with the scene, something beyond the obvious absence of people. She looked more closely at the dishes and realized there were no handprints, fingerprints, or any sign that anyone had actually touched the utensils while setting the table. Everything was too perfect, as if it had been placed there by gloves, or... She pushed the thought away. "Let's check the kitchen," she said to Calloway. "Someone prepared this. It has to be somewhere in the house." They left the dining room, but Hendricks couldn't help but look back one last time. For an irrational moment, she had the feeling that if she turned around, she would find 12 people sitting there when she looked again. The kitchen was the opposite of the dining room in terms of organization. Pots on the stove were boiling, some overflowing. The oven was open, an empty baking tray inside still warm. The sink was full of dirty utensils, cutting boards with vegetable residue, knives abandoned halfway through use. It was as if someone had been in the middle of frantically preparing a banquet and simply disappeared. "Look here," Calloway pointed to the stove. 4 burners were lit, low flames under pots that had clearly been left unattended for too long. He quickly turned them all off. In one of them, sauce had burnt on the bottom, creating a charred crust. It had been like this for at least an hour, maybe more. Whoever was cooking left or was removed suddenly. Hendricks opened the refrigerator. It was fully stocked. Meats, dairy, fresh vegetables, all within their expiration dates. In the freezer, there were ice creams and an apple pie that looked homemade. On the counter, a handwritten shopping list in a notepad. 11:14, dinner at 7:30 p.m. Today, dinner was scheduled exactly now. But where was the host and the 11 guests? And why was the 12th place card blank? "Sarah, you need to see this." Calloway stood in the doorway to the pantry. Inside, on shelves organized with almost military precision, were enough groceries to feed a large family for months. But what caught Calloway's attention was a box on the floor, partially open. Inside were 12 white candles, the kind used in religious rituals or memorials, and a book bound in black leather. Hendricks picked up the book carefully. It had no title on the cover. She opened it and found pages filled with the same elegant handwriting as the place cards. They were diary entries, dated for the past 3 months. The first entry, from August 14th, 2022, simply read, "They said I could bring them back, all of them. I just need to follow the instructions exactly. Dinner must be perfect. They deserve a perfect dinner." Hendricks felt her stomach sink as she flipped through the pages, each entry becoming progressively more disturbing. Hendricks took the diary back to the dining room, where the light was better, and began reading aloud to Calloway, who was photographing the scene with his body camera. The second entry, from August 20th, was more detailed. "I found the site Margaret mentioned before that day. It's all there, the instructions, the preparations. They say the veil between worlds is thinner on certain dates at certain times. November 14th at 7:30 p.m. That's the window. I have 3 months to prepare everything. The table must be set exactly as it was. The food must be your favorites. 12 places, 12 souls, 1 chance." The handwriting was firm, controlled, but Hendricks could feel the desperation bleeding through the words. The September entries became more specific and more obsessive. September 3rd, I bought the china, exactly the same pattern we had. It cost a fortune at auction, but it has to be authentic. They'll notice if something's wrong. Margaret always noticed the details. September 12, I practiced roasting the lamb 4 times this week. It has to be perfect. James always said my lamb was the best he'd ever tasted. I want him to say it again. September 27, the neighbors are asking questions. They said the lights always come on at the same time. They can't know. Nobody can know until it's complete, until they come back. Calloway and Hendricks exchanged glances. The implication was becoming clear and utterly disturbing. The entry for October 1st made Hendricks stop breathing for a moment. I received the names, all 11. Margaret, my wife. Thomas and Elizabeth, our children. James, my brother. Catherine, his wife. The others, Robert, Helen, William, Dorothy, Charles, Anne. All of them. Everyone who was in the car that day. The accident on the M62 5 years ago. They said I didn't survive, but I woke up in the hospital 3 days later, alone. Always alone since then, but not for much longer. The ritual promises to bring them back for one night, one last meal together, one last family dinner. And if I do everything right, maybe they can stay. Hendricks's hands trembled as he gripped the book. Calloway had pulled out his phone and was quickly searching. "Sarah," he said, his voice strained, "has an accident recorded on the M62 in November 2017. Van carrying family to a wedding. Collision with truck. 11 fatalities. 1 survivor in critical condition, taken to the Royal Liverpool Hospital." He continued scrolling. The survivor, named Edward Pritchard, 58 years old at the time, registered as a resident of, he paused, looking around the room, registered as a resident of 47 Penny Lane, Liverpool. Heavy silence filled the room. They were in Edward Pritchard's house, and Edward had spent the last 3 months preparing a dinner for 11 dead people. The October and early November entries documented Edward's downward spiral into something that oscillated between pathological grief and complete possession by the idea of reuniting his family. October 15th, I haven't slept for 3 days. I keep seeing them in the corners of my eyes. Margaret in the kitchen, Thomas in the hallway. They're waiting. They know I'm trying. Just 1 more month. November 3rd. I practiced setting the table 20 times today. Every napkin must be folded at the exact angle, every glass filled to the precise level. The website said, "Perfection attracts perfection. Imperfection attracts other things." November 10th, 4 days. I can almost hear them, voices at night, laughing, talking, like we used to. The house feels fuller, more alive. They are coming back. I can feel it. The last entry was from today, November 14th, written hastily, the handwriting finally showing signs of instability. It's today. Today. I prepared everything exactly as instructed in the old texts. The food is cooking. The table is perfect. At 7:30 p.m., I light the 12 candles, 1 for each of them, and then I wait. The website said they will come, that the veil will open, that I will have my family back, even if only for a few hours. But there's something I don't understand. Why 12 places? There are only 11 of us plus me, 12 in total. But the website insisted 12 places must be set, 12 candles must be lit, 12 souls at the table. Am I the 12th? Or is it for someone else? Something that comes with them? The website didn't explain, but it doesn't matter. Nothing matters except seeing them again. Losing them once was unbearable, but choosing not to try to bring them back,
That would be true hell. And then underlined 3 times, 7:30 p.m. The time is approaching. Calloway checked his watch, 10:14 p.m., more than 2.5 hours after the time Edward had set for the ritual. "We need to find him," he said, putting the phone away. "If he's in some kind of psychotic episode, he could be in danger to himself or to others." Hendricks agreed, but something in the back of her mind bothered her. The food was hot, freshly prepared. That meant Edward had been here for less than an hour. But why would he flee his own home right before the event he had obsessively planned for 3 months? Unless something had gone wrong or terribly right. They requested reinforcements by radio and began a systematic search of the house, floor by floor. The ground floor beyond the kitchen and dining room revealed a living room frozen in time, 1990s furniture, a tube television, a VCR tape, stacks of VHS tapes with handwritten labels, Christmas 1998, Cornwall Holidays 2001, Thomas's birthday 2003. On the walls, the same family photographs that Hendricks had noticed in the hallway. But now, looking more closely under the proper light, she noticed something disturbing. In each photograph, Edward's face had been carefully cut out and removed. 11 people smiling, embracing, celebrating, and a rectangular hole where Edward should have been. "He's faded away," Hendricks murmured, literally removed himself from the family memories. Calloway touched one of the frames. The glass was clean, dust-free. This had been done recently. They went upstairs to the first floor. 3 bedrooms, all preserved like sanctuaries. The first was clearly a teenage boy's room, posters of bands from the 2000s, a PlayStation 2 console, a school backpack still hanging on the chair. "Thomas," Hendricks said softly, remembering the name on the place card. The second room was feminine, younger. Posters of pop groups, stuffed animals arranged on the bed, school notebooks on the desk, Elizabeth. The third room, the largest, was the couple's. A perfectly made double bed, women's clothes still in the wardrobe, makeup products on the dressing table, Margaret. Each room was immaculate, clean, but clearly untouched for years, like a museum, like tombs. The second floor, there was only one room that seemed inhabited, small, Spartan, with a messy single bed, piles of papers, an open laptop on the desk, and walls covered, absolutely covered with printouts of internet pages. Calloway approached the wall and began reading the headings: "How to Cross the Veil Between Worlds," invocations of rituals for familiar spirits, the sacred geometry of the dining table, temporal portals on dates of power. There were hundreds of pages, all marked, highlighted, annotated in the margin in Edward's handwriting, and in the center of the wall, printed on large paper, an image that made both officers freeze for a moment. A diagram showing a table set for 12 with arcane symbols drawn around it, and a handwritten note, position 12 equals anchoring. Something must keep the portal open, voluntary or involuntary. "My God," Hendricks whispered. He wasn't just planning on having dinner with them. He was trying to... She couldn't finish the sentence. Calloway finished for her, his voice strained. He was trying to switch places. 12 souls at the table, 11 dead return, 1 living goes. That's why the 12th card is blank. It was for him. He was going to sacrifice himself. They looked around the room with new understanding. This wasn't just grief. It was an elaborate suicide plan, disguised as a mystical ritual. Edward Pritchard had spent 5 years living with survivor guilt and 3 months planning his own death to reunite with his family. But if that was the case, where was the body? Hendricks began checking the bathroom, the closet, under the bed, places where someone in a crisis might have done something drastic. Nothing. Calloway was examining the laptop. The screen showed an online forum, Edward's last post marked at 6:47 p.m., 43 minutes before the planned time of the ritual. The post read, "It's today. I'm ready. I've prepared everything as instructed."
"Police! If there's anyone down there, identify yourself immediately," Hendricks shouted from the stairs. Her voice echoed strangely, as if the space below was much larger than it should be for a house of this size. No answer. She found a light switch on the wall and flipped it. A single bare bulb lit up down there, casting long shadows. The staircase was steep, the steps worn by time. Hendricks went down first, Calloway close behind, both with flashlights in one hand, radios in the other. The air grew progressively colder with each step, and there was a smell, not unpleasant but intense, of recently extinguished candles and something metallic. The basement was larger than the entire floor plan of the house above it, which was architecturally impossible. The walls were of rough stone, not the concrete one would expect in a Victorian building. The ceiling was low, forcing Calloway, who was tall, to slightly stoop his head. But what dominated the space was an exact replica of the dining table upstairs. Same mahogany wood, same 12 chairs, same plates and glasses. Except this table was in complete disarray. Broken plates on the floor, chairs overturned, glasses shattered, and in the center of the table, 12 white candles in candelabras, all burned to the end, melted wax covering the surface of the table like coagulated blood. "What the hell is this?" Calloway whispered. Hendricks approached the table, his flashlight illuminating the place cards. The same 11 names: Margaret, Thomas, Elizabeth, James, Catherine, Robert, Helen, William, Dorothy, Charles, Anne. And the 12th card, which was blank upstairs, here had a name written in a different handwriting, trembling, desperate: Edward. Next to the card was a photograph, the only one Hendricks had seen in the entire house that still included Edward's face. It showed the whole family, all 12 of them, at a Christmas celebration. Edward was in the center, surrounded by his family, smiling genuinely. The photo was stained with red wax. No, Hendricks realized with growing horror, it wasn't wax. It was blood. Calloway had found something behind one of the overturned chairs. "Sarah." His voice was strangely calm, the kind of calm that comes when the brain can't fully process what it's seeing. "I found Edward." Hendricks rushed to his side and had to cover his mouth to keep from screaming. Edward Pritchard was lying on the stone floor, dressed in a formal suit as if he were getting ready for dinner. His eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling, but there were no visible injuries, no blood beyond that which stained the photograph, no sign of trauma. He simply looked empty, like a shell. Dr. Chen, who would later respond to the medical examiner's call, would describe it as death without apparent cause, as if life had simply been extracted from him, leaving only the physical vessel behind. The scene quickly turned into a full-blown criminal investigation. By 11:30 p.m., the house was filled with forensic technicians, crime scene photographers, and Detective Inspector Marcus Webb, a 23-year veteran of the Merseyside Criminal Investigation Department. Webb went down to the basement, examined the scene, and his first question was the same one Hendricks had asked. How is it possible for this space to be so large? The dimensions don't match the house plan. The city architect called in for consultation couldn't explain it. According to official records, 47 Penny Lane didn't have a basement. It never had. The house was built in 1887 on a shallow foundation, as was common at the time. And yet, there was a stone basement that looked centuries old. The medical examiner, Dr. Rashid Khan, performed a preliminary examination of Edward Pritchard's body at the scene. Body temperature is ambient. Rigor mortis is present but not complete, suggesting death approximately 2 to 4 hours ago. But, he paused, frowning, this doesn't make sense. There's no lividity. The blood hasn't settled in the lower part of the body as it should. It's as if there is no blood to settle. He made a small incision in Edward's arm to collect a sample. What came out wasn't blood, but a clear liquid, almost like water. "This is medically impossible," Khan said, his voice losing his professional tone for a moment. "A human being can't be like this and have been alive just a few hours ago." The forensic technicians began photographing and cataloging the scene.
One of them, a young man fresh out of training, called Webb over to see something. "Sir, I found marks on the floor, here, around the table." Webb approached with a bright flashlight. On the stone floor, there were drag marks, 12 sets of them, starting from where the chairs were originally positioned and going towards the center of the room, converging at where Edward's body was. "It looks like something was dragged," the technician said, "or someone. 12 people being dragged to the center?" But that didn't make sense. Edward was alone. There were no more bodies. There was no blood beyond the small amount in the photograph. Where had the other 11 people gone? Hendricks was examining the candles when she noticed something peculiar. The melted wax hadn't naturally dripped down the sides of the candlesticks, as would be expected. Instead, it had formed patterns, complex geometric symbols on the surface of the table. She called a colleague who had an interest in history to look at it. "These look like alchemical symbols," he said, taking pictures with his phone. "This one is for transformation, this one for portal, and this one for exchange. And these here in the center," he paused, enlarging the image on his phone. "These aren't alchemical. They're older. Maybe Celtic? Or pre-Celtic? I'd need an expert." But the implication was clear. The candles hadn't simply burned. They had burned in a way that created these specific patterns, as if guided by intelligence. Webb ordered the team to check upstairs again, specifically the dining room. When they returned downstairs, they discovered something that made everyone on the scene stop and question their own sanity. The dining table, which had been perfectly set when they first entered, now was in disarray. Not exactly like the basement table, but similarly disturbed. 3 of the chairs were overturned, several plates that cracks that definitely weren't there before. And more disturbing, the food had been partially consumed. Pieces of lamb had been cut and removed from the plates. Wine had been drunk from several glasses. Bread was broken. "We photographed everything when we came in," Hendricks said, his voice rising. "The food was untouched. We photographed it." Webb pulled up the images from Hendricks's body camera. He was right. At 9:43 p.m. when they first entered the dining room, the food was perfectly untouched, the plates empty and clean. Now, less than 2 hours later, with the house full of forensics and technicians, someone or something had dined at that table. Webb ordered DNA samples taken from everything: the forks that had been used, the glasses that were drunk from, the napkins that showed stains. And then he asked the question no one wanted to consider. If we assume for a moment of madness that Edward's ritual somehow worked, if he did in fact bring something through, where are they now? 11 entities, whether spirits, resurrections, or whatever he conjured, they dined, and then what? Where did they go? The silence in the room was deafening, because no one had an answer. And everyone knew that the alternative, that they were still in the house, invisible, intangible, but present, was even more terrifying. In the following weeks, the results of the forensic tests began to arrive, and each one raised more questions than answers. The DNA collected from the utensils used in the dining room matched 11 different individuals. Webb's team initially assumed cross-contamination or laboratory error, but 3 independent laboratories confirmed the same results. Most disturbing, when these DNA profiles were entered into the national database, 11 matches were found. Margaret Pritchard, Thomas Pritchard, Elizabeth Pritchard, and the other 8 family members who died in 2017 accident. "This is impossible," the head of the forensic lab told Webb. "DNA doesn't survive 5 years in a buried body, and certainly doesn't show up fresh on dinnerware. Unless—" He stopped, not wanting to complete the absurd thought. Analysis of the fluid found on Edward's body revealed it to be chemically pure distilled water with minute traces of minerals that matched the composition of human tears. All of Edward's blood had been replaced by this fluid. The human body contains approximately 5 liters of blood. All of that blood was removed and replaced without leaving wounds or extraction points. The only medical explanation would be a massive, total blood transfusion. But that would take hours, specialized equipment, and leave obvious marks. Mr. Pritchard has none of those marks. It's as if the blood has simply been transmuted into another state. Official cause of death: undetermined, anomalous physiological phenomenon. Webb decided to interview the neighbor who had made the initial call.
Mrs. Dorothy Fletcher, 73, had lived next door for 42 years. She had known the Pritchard family since before the accident. Edward was a good man, she said, tears in her eyes. He worked as an accountant, a devoted family man. After the accident, he was never the same. Of course he wouldn't be. To lose his entire family at once. She paused, wiping her eyes. But in the last few weeks, I've seen things. Lights turning on and off in strange patterns. Sometimes late at night, I swore I heard voices. Not just one voice, but many. Laughing, singing, as if there was a party going on. But when I looked, I didn't see anyone through the windows. Mrs. Fletcher, Webb asked gently, why did you wait until this week to call the police, if you'd been noticing strange things for weeks? The elderly woman looked at her hands, clearly uncomfortable. Because part of me wanted to believe it was real, that maybe Edward had somehow found his family again. I heard them through the walls, Detective. Conversations. Margaret Pritchard asking about the garden.
Webb also tracked down other, more distant Pritchard family members, uncles, cousins, Edward's co-workers. All confirmed that Edward had become increasingly reclusive after the accident, eventually losing his job, living off Margaret's life insurance policy and savings. But several mentioned something disturbing. In the last 2 months, Edward had been contacting them asking for personal items belonging to the deceased. He called me in September, said a cousin, asking if I had anything that belonged to Thomas. He said he was making a memorial. I gave him an old baseball cap of Thomas's. I thought it was part of the grieving process. Other family members reported similar requests. Edward had collected personal items from all 11 deceased. A more thorough search of the basement revealed where these items had gone, buried in small boxes under each of the 12 chair positions around the table. 11 boxes contained personal items, Thomas's baseball cap, Margaret's engagement ring, Elizabeth's children's book, and so on. The 12th box, under the chair where Edward had presumably sat, contained something different. Locks of Edward's hair, old photos of him at various ages, and a piece of paper with words written in Latin that the police translator identified as an ancient soul-binding ritual, essentially offering one's own life essence in exchange for bringing lost souls back across the veil. He wasn't just trying to have dinner with them, Webb realized aloud. He was trying to anchor them here, give them a way back to the physical world. And the price, he didn't need to finish. The price had been Edward's own life. His essence, his life force, his literal blood, all drained to fuel the ritual that would bring his family back. The question remained, had it worked? 2 weeks after the discovery of Edward Pritchard's body, sightings began. The first report came from a night bus driver on the route that passed through Penny Lane. I saw a woman standing in the garden of number 47, he reported, at 3 in the morning, just standing there, looking at the house. I used the high beams to be sure, and for a second she looked directly at me. Then she was simply not there anymore. Didn't run, didn't move, just disappeared. The description he gave of the woman perfectly matched Margaret Pritchard. When shown family photos, he identified Margaret immediately, without hesitation. It was her, I'm absolutely sure. But how can it be? You said she died 5 years ago. More reports quickly followed. A newspaper delivery man saw 2 children, a boy and a girl, sitting on the front steps of number 47 at 5 a.m. When I approached to ask if they were all right, they simply dissolved, like smoke. Their descriptions matched Thomas and Elizabeth. A neighbor across the street swore he saw the whole family sitting at the table through the dining room window, everyone talking, laughing, passing food around. I put on my glasses to see better, and when I looked again, the room was empty and dark. Webb initially assumed mass hysteria or people seeking attention, but the reports were too consistent, too detailed, coming from people with no connection to each other. Mrs. Fletcher herself had the most disturbing experience. She woke up one night to the sound of knocking on the wall shared between her house and Edward's. It was 3 in the morning, she reported, visibly shaken. The knocking had a pattern. 3 quick knocks, pause, 3 quick knocks. Margaret and I used to use that code when we were living neighbors. It was our way of saying all right through the wall when our husbands were away. Mrs. Fletcher, against her better judgment, knocked back. 3 knocks. The knocking from the other side stopped for a moment, then started again, this time more urgent, more desperate. And then I heard Margaret's voice, clear as day, through the wall.
Dorothy, it was a mistake. We shouldn't have come back. He's trapped us here. Help us. Mrs. Fletcher hasn't slept in her house since. Webb ordered continuous night surveillance of the property. Cameras were installed covering every angle of the house. For the first 3 nights, nothing was captured. But on the 4th night, at 7:30 p.m. sharp, the exact time Edward planned his ritual, the cameras captured something inexplicable. All the lights in the house came on simultaneously, even though the electricity had been cut off as part of the investigation. Through the windows, the cameras recorded shadows moving inside the house. Not vague or ambiguous shadows, but clear silhouettes of people walking, sitting, interacting. The thermal recording showed heat signatures corresponding to human bodies, all 12 of them, all gathered in the dining room. This lasted exactly 17 minutes. Then, at 7:47 p.m., everything instantly went dark and the thermal readings disappeared. The immediate response team stormed the house within 2 minutes. They found it completely empty, cold, with no signs of occupancy. But in the dining room, something had changed again. The table, which had been dismantled and taken as evidence days before, was back, perfectly set for 12 people. The same china, the same crystal, the same place cards. Webb personally checked the evidence storage facility. The original table was still there, labeled and stored. Somehow, a perfect duplicate had appeared in the house. Or a more disturbing thought, the table itself had replicated itself. As if the ritual had created a loop, a permanent imprint of that fateful dinner that now repeated itself every night at 7:30 p.m. Webb made the decision to spend an entire night inside the house, accompanied by Hendricks, who volunteered despite objections from his superiors, and a local priest, Father Michael O'Connor, who specialized in unusual spiritual situations. They settled into the living room at 6 p.m., well before the critical time. If there's something here, we're going to confront it directly. No remote cameras, no observation from a distance, face to face. Hendricks checked her equipment. Audio recorder, handheld video camera, EMF or electromagnetic field meter, and digital thermometer. Father Michael brought holy water, a cross, and a prayer book for the dead. At 7 p.m., he began to pray silently. At 7:15 p.m., the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees in less than a minute. And at 7:29 p.m., all 3 distinctly heard the sound of a doorbell ringing, followed by voices at the front door. Voices greeting each other warmly like guests arriving for dinner. 12 voices, and one of them, unmistakably, was Edward Pritchard welcoming his family home. Webb, Hendricks, and Father O'Connor remained frozen in the living room as the sounds of a family gathering echoed down the hallway. Laughter, overlapping conversations, the clinking of glasses, the scraping of chairs, all the sounds of a lively dinner. But when Webb forced himself to move and cautiously peered down the hallway toward the dining room, he saw nothing. The hallway was empty, lit only by the light of his flashlight, and yet the sounds continued, clearly coming from the dining room, as real and tangible as any conversation between the living. "They're here," Father O'Connor whispered, his voice trembling, "but they're not fully manifested on our plane. They're between worlds." Hendricks was monitoring the EMF meter. The pointer spun wildly, registering electromagnetic fields fluctuating from 0 to peak levels and back again. "The activity is intense," she reported, her professional voice masking the fear Webb could see in her eyes. "And it's getting stronger." The audio recorder in her hands was picking up everything, not just vague sounds or ambiguous noises, but clear conversations. She put on headphones to listen in real time and immediately paled. I can hear them discussing the food. Edward is apologizing because the lamb was slightly dry. Margaret is saying it's perfect. Thomas is asking for more wine. Elizabeth is telling about a dream she had." She took off the headphones with trembling hands. "These are normal conversations, a normal family having dinner, except they're all dead." At 7:45 p.m., Father Michael began an exorcism prayer. His voice echoed through the house, "In nomine Patri, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti." Immediately, the sounds in the dining room stopped. Absolute silence fell over the house, so complete that Webb could hear his own heart beating. Then, softly at first, but growing in intensity, a voice began to speak. It was Edward Pritchard, but his voice sounded different, distant, echoing, as if it came from far away. "Please, no, not yet.
I brought you back. We're finally together again. Please, just a little more time. Just one more dinner."
Webb made a decision that would later be questioned by his superiors. He entered the dining room. Hendricks and the priest followed him, neither wanting to leave him alone. The room was exactly as the cameras had shown, table set, but this time there was something different. The chairs weren't empty, or rather, they weren't completely empty. Seated in each of the 12 chairs were impressions, as if invisible bodies were pressing against the seats. And on the table, the plates that had been empty now showed partially consumed food. Glasses were at different levels of fullness, as if they had been drunk from. Napkins were unfolded and used. "They're here," Webb said, his voice surprisingly calm. "Sitting right in front of us. We just can't see them." "Not exactly," Edward's voice replied, this time coming directly from the main chair. And then, as if a veil were slowly being lifted, Webb began to see. Not completely, not solidly, but like ghostly transparencies. 12 figures seated at the table. Edward at the head of the bed, Margaret beside him, the children, the siblings, all there, all staring intently at Webb with expressions that mixed hope, fear, and something darker. "Can you see us?" Edward asked, his ghostly form leaning forward. "Finally, someone can see us." Hendricks gasped. She could see them now too, and from the strangled sound Father O'Connor made, he could as well. "Edward," Webb began, forcing his voice to remain steady, "you're dead. You're all dead. This isn't life. You need to go. You all need to go." Edward's ghost shook his head violently. "No, I brought them back. I spent 5 years alone, 5 years in agony, and finally I found a way. They're here. We're together." But Margaret, or what was left of Margaret, placed a translucent hand on Edward's arm. "Edward, darling," her voice was sweet but held a hint of infinite sadness. "He's right. This isn't life. We aren't really us. We are what you remember us as. Your memories, your love, your despair, all of that shaped us and brought us back. But we aren't your real Margaret, Thomas, and Elizabeth. We are echoes, shadows." The other figures at the table nodded slowly, and Webb realized with growing horror that some of them were crying tears that evaporated before touching their non-existent cheeks. Edward Pritchard, or whoever had returned using his name, looked around the table at the 11 figures he had brought back through the veil. Webb could see the understanding slowly settling on Edward's face, the terrible realization of what he had truly done. I thought that if I followed the instructions exactly, if I gave it my all," his voice broke. "But you're not real, are you? I didn't bring you back. I created copies. Ghosts made from my memories and my blood." Margaret squeezed his hand, her translucent form barely visible. "We loved you so much that you couldn't let us go, and that love, Edward, was powerful enough to tear the veil between worlds. But love alone cannot cheat death. It cannot reverse what has been done." Thomas, the ghost of Edward's teenage son, spoke for the first time, his voice young but carrying a terrible weight. "Father, every night at 7:30 p.m. we return to this table, not because we want to, because you trapped us here. The ritual you performed, the blood you gave, created an anchor, a prison. We can't go where we're supposed to be, wherever that is, and neither can you. You're trapped here with us, repeating this dinner every night, eternally." The other figures around the table nodded slowly, and Hendricks realized with horror that this was not just a haunting, it was a time loop, a piece of reality frozen, forced to repeat itself indefinitely. Father O'Connor stepped forward, his cross raised, but his voice was gentle. "Edward, all of you, there is a way to break this, but it requires you to let go, truly let go. The ritual you performed worked because you couldn't accept the loss. Every ounce of your pain, every memory, every refusal to move on fueled the magic that brought them back. But if you accept it, if you release your attachment,
And Edward interrupted, his form becoming more agitated, less solid. And then what? I'm alone again? I go back to that empty house, that horrible silence, knowing I'll never see their faces again? The priest shook his head slowly. No, Edward, you don't go back. You're gone too. You died that night when the ritual was complete. You gave your life trying to bring them back. What remains here are only echoes of all of you. Full understanding finally dawned on Edward. He looked at his own hands, seeing them transparent, unsteady. So all this, 3 months of planning, the hope, the ritual, all I achieved was trapping us all in a hell of my own making? Margaret embraced him, or tried to. Her arms passed partially through him, but the intention was there. We loved you, Edward, so deeply that you tore apart the very laws of nature. But now you have to love us enough to let us go, to let yourself go. Around the table, the other family members rose, drawing closer to Edward. They surrounded him in a collective embrace, 12 souls trapped between worlds, united by love and tragedy. Webb found his voice, though it came rough. Edward, if you break the ritual, if you release the anchor, what happens to you? Edward looked at him, and for the first time since he had appeared, there was something resembling peace in his eyes. I don't know. Maybe we can finally rest. Maybe we can go where we should have gone 5 years ago, when the accident happened. Or maybe we'll simply cease to exist. But anything is better than this, trapped forever in this moment, in this charade of a family dinner, knowing it's never real. It can never be real. He turned to his family. I'm sorry for everything, for not being able to save you, for not being able to let you go, for trapping you here with my selfishness. One by one, the figures embraced him, whispering apologies, declaring love, saying goodbye. And then Edward Pritchard did the only thing that could break him free. He accepted. I let you go, he said, his voice gaining strength. I release you. I release myself. We had our time together. It was good while it lasted. It was real while it lasted. But now it's time for all of us to part. The moment he spoke those words, the room began to glow, not with normal light, but with something deeper, purer. The figures around the table began to fade, but unlike previous apparitions, they were smiling, waving. Thomas pointed to something Webb couldn't see, as if he were seeing a door opening. Elizabeth took Margaret's hand, the siblings embraced, and Edward, the last to disappear, looked directly at Webb and said, Don't do what I did. When you lose someone, and you will, everyone loses eventually. Let them go. Let them go, or you will lose yourselves too. And in a flash of light that made all 3 living close their eyes, they were gone. When Webb opened his eyes again, the dining room was empty. The table was gone, the chairs too. It was just an empty room in an empty house. The house at 47 Penny Lane was demolished 3 months later. The plot remains vacant to this day, with no one wanting to build there. But here's what didn't make it into the official reports. In the days following that night, more than 40 people in Liverpool reported identical dreams. In the dream, they were sitting at a dinner table with loved ones they had lost. The table was beautifully set, the food was perfect, and a voice, the voice of Edward Pritchard, whispered, Don't try to follow me. Don't try to bring them back. Let them go when the time is right. Promise me. Everyone woke up at 7:30 p.m. sharp, crying. Webb filed the case as death from natural causes under unusual circumstances. Officially, Edward Pritchard died alone in his basement of a stress-induced heart attack. But Webb keeps a photo of the Pritchard family on his desk, not as a macabre memento, but as a reminder, love can do extraordinary things. It can move mountains, cross oceans, even defy death. But there is a line between love and obsession, between healthy grief and a pathological refusal to move on. Edward Pritchard crossed that line and paid a price that no human being should have to pay. If you have ever lost someone close to you, If you have ever felt that incomprehensible pain that makes you consider anything to have them back, I implore you, don't do what Edward did. Don't look for rituals on the dark web. Don't try to contact what shouldn't be contacted. Don't try to force the universe to undo what has already been done. Because what you bring back will never truly be them. It will be a shadow, an echo, a trap. And you may find yourself trapped in that trap, repeating the same moments, the same pain, forever. And if you are already doing this, if you have already started planning, researching, preparing a last meal with places set for those who are gone, stop, now. Seek help. Talk to someone. Grief is real. Pain is valid. But there are ways to heal that don't involve tearing holes between worlds. Edward Pritchard learned this too late. You still have time. By the way, if you live in an old house, and if one night you realize that your dining table is set for more people than live there, if you hear voices